The release of David Hilton and General Elma's report, We Know You Better Than You Know Yourself, China's Transnational Repression of the Uyghur Diaspora. I'm Robert, the program director at the Uyghur Human Rights Project. Transnational repression is a serious issue for the Uyghur diaspora. The continued harassment, coercion, and intimidation of Uyghurs creates an atmosphere of fear and anxiety, silencing Uyghurs and stifling their advocacy for themselves, their loved ones, and their homeland. This report offers important insight into the nature of transnational repression in the Uyghur diaspora and the long-lasting and long-reaching effects of the Chinese party state in silencing Uyghurs and disconnecting them from their culture. It also offers critical recommendations for states and international multilateral organizations such as the United Nations to address acts of transnational repression, including ensuring safe passage and protection for Uyghurs and security hotlines for diaspora members to report acts of TNR. These recommendations are in line with what Uyghur human rights groups and civil society groups have been calling on for years, and Narola and David's research only solidifies the foundations of policy recommendations UHRP has made. UHRP has worked extensively on transnational repression going back to our report in 2018, The Fifth Poison, which detailed what Uyghur members of the diaspora were experiencing, which is now called TNR, transnational repression. UHRP has released a number of reports detailing acts of transnational repression against Uyghurs and the urgent humanitarian needs of Uyghurs in unsafe third countries. This genocide seeks not only to destroy and forcibly assimilate Uyghur culture in our homeland, but to sever the rooted connection and culture from the diaspora and leave us in the dark about who we are. The preservation and growth of the diaspora is a defiance of China's intent to eliminate Uyghurs and Uyghur culture. So, without further ado, I'd like to introduce our two authors of the report. Dr. David Hilton is a lecturer in East Asian Studies at the University of Sheffield. His research on identity and security in global politics focuses on China's ethnic policy and Han-Uyghur relations, and has published in China Quarterly, Ethnic and Racial Studies, HAU Journal of Ethnographic Theory, Positions, Asia Critique, Oxford Bibliographies, and InterAsia. His book with Cambridge University Press, Securing China's Northwest Frontier, Identity and Insecurity in Xinjiang, analyzes the relationships between identity and security in Chinese policymaking and its impact on Han-Uyghur relations. He presented evidence at all three hearings of the Uyghur Tribunal on state violence and the classified document leak known as the Xinjiang Papers. David's current research on China's new ethnic policy and genocide includes a new interdisciplinary project documenting Uyghur diaspora voices, using film, image, and text to share life stories of Uyghurs separated from their families and homes. And Narola Elma is an independent journalist and researcher with extensive expertise in human rights in China. Narola has written about Uyghur human rights issues for The New Yorker and The Spectator, and contributed to a Pulitzer Prize-winning project for BuzzFeed News. Her powerful reporting and research have also earned her an Emmy nomination and a place on the BBC News Awards shortlist. Her research and production regularly appears on BBC, CNN, TV2 Denmark, and The Information. As a native Uyghur from Xinjiang, fluent in Uyghur and Mandarin, Narola's 25 years of experience living in China brings a rich combination of first-hand knowledge alongside professional experience of policy research in Xinjiang and China, including its impact on Han, Uyghur, and Kazakh language.
Thank you. So I'll begin by explaining the title of our report. This is really drawn from a recording of police harassment by one of our research participants. In ongoing conversations with our local police station between 2018 and 2019, an anonymous middle-aged woman in Istanbul was offered information and contact with her detained family in return for conducting surveillance of Uyghur diaspora activities, but she refused. When she received a phone call from a Chinese police officer ordering her to take photographs and collect information on the daily activities and associations of her Uyghur friends in Turkey, she offered to answer any questions about herself, but firmly stated, "I cannot report on others." The policeman responded that China is getting stronger, and we know you better than you know yourself, reminding her that although she was a Turkish citizen living in Istanbul, thousands of miles from her homeland, she was under constant surveillance and will always be governed by the party state. She also shared material evidence that she and her family were being followed on a daily basis and being photographed by other informants. The police officer then attempted to persuade her by saying the UN would visit and report if this genocide is real. After he said that, he would visit her family and take photographs in their home. He told her to go seek justice because there is no evidence. Since the establishment of the mass detention system for Uyghurs and other Turkic-speaking Muslim groups inside the PRC around 2017, this form of harassment and surveillance has become an everyday story in the Uyghur diaspora, in which transnational repression is universal and people navigate the impact of state violence, family separation, harassment, and the infiltration of informants in their everyday lives. Our report defines transnational repression as practices by any state to repress or control the behaviour, thought, or identity of citizens outside its sovereign jurisdiction. This includes threats of violence, deportations, and harm to people's families, but we also consider offering so-called benefits or incentives that include money or family contact or the right to return home in return for conducting surveillance of their own community, changing behaviour, or their personal associations. These are the flip side of those threats which cause widespread psychological harm in Uyghur communities. Rigorous research reports by the Uyghur Human Rights Project and Oxford Society describe TNR as a systematic and widespread campaign to intimidate Uyghurs, which has accelerated dramatically with the onset of the system for mass surveillance since 2017. Freedom House identifies urgent issues related to TNR, including passport complication, surveillance and coercion by proxy in the UK, harassment of protesters at the Chinese embassy in Turkey, including being arbitrarily detained and threatened with deportation, and in Thailand, deportations of over 100 Uyghurs to China in 2015. So our report builds on and updates this important work with all field work conducted in 2023. It shows that the scale of transnational repression in the Uyghur diaspora is universal, and its impact deeply affects individuals' capacity to exercise their rights to free speech, association and assembly, but it also impacts their ability as a group to maintain their culture. So we're going to talk about the methods. So we'll talk about the methods and then hand over to Naroa. Really, we use very human-centered methods. Everything focused on the lived experiences of Uyghurs facing transnational repression. We directly asked affected communities how TNR has affected their lives and what would protect them. We also follow the principle of all data is good data, meaning when someone said they had not experienced transnational repression, we then said we want to talk to you, we do want to interview you. People said, there's no point talking to me. We said, no, we want to know why you have not experienced this and why someone else has. We worked in 3 field sites, the UK, Turkey and Thailand, because these are very different political systems. We found that regime type really matters in the impact on the Uyghur community. Democracies have greater capacity to withstand pressure from China and can support Uyghur civil rights. This enabled comparison of the scale and impact of TNR in the Uyghur diaspora based on the national interests and international relations of the host states. And it captures the contrasting opportunities for Uyghur communities to exercise their rights and build lives in new societies, depending on the conditions in those societies. And we hand over to Naroa to talk about the next.
The method we conduct for this project is through the survey and the individual interview. The survey, we get the enthusiastic response from the Turkey. Over 120 people has been filled the survey, and after this, they said we have been receiving message telling us that they will to do the interview and they book the time with us. Unfortunately, we couldn't distribute the survey in Thailand because Uyghur people are in the IDC, Immigration Detention Center, in order to protect them. So we didn't distribute the survey in Thailand. In UK, we didn't get a very enthusiastic response in survey, and later we confirmed this from the interview that Uyghur diaspora community in UK are lack of the faith to the UK government because they were afraid if they report this work, some of them have been report the transnational repression they have been faces in the UK to the government, but didn't get very specific on the detail to how to access. So they were lack of whether the UK government will actually have some legal action. On the individual interview, we interviewed more than 50 Uyghurs about their experiences on the TNR. Majority of them are faced with TNR, and some of them have been facing this repeatedly since 2000. Some of them started actually since 2016, and the peak was like around 2018 and 2017.
Okay. Let's briefly talk about the official policy of transnational repression, the documents that provide the material evidence for these policies. Now we know that Xi Jinping talks a lot about neighbourhood diplomacy, expanding China's global influence. This is nothing new in studies of China's foreign policy. Will Callahan and Christopher Hughes talk frequently about how China's policy state does not necessarily separate the inside and outside of its territory in terms of its security interests or its policies. We know that Zhao Zhe, the PSP security chief, described Xinjiang policy's new phase as being international. It's now focused on breaking connections between Uyghurs and Islamic and democratic societies and controlling information, namely academic research on this subject. So we decided to zoom in instead of stepping back and try to look at the way the policies are implemented more locally. One of the documents we use is the ELE Public Security Handbook that will is on the Xinjiang Police Files website now. This term, backflow prevention, is used repeatedly. We found this across state media. It's really just to describe the need to monitor Uyghurs who go abroad and to make sure that the flows of information and people are controlled. This is backflow prevention. There's a 90-day rule that Uyghurs who return home are to be examined for their speech, behaviour and activities for both abnormalities. That phrase abnormalities is used in multiple documents. It describes risk assessments, extremely detailed. It should be taking place weekly, monthly, quarterly, annually, and these are really to monitor the communications of Uyghurs, specifically which communication apps they use to talk to their families abroad. That's really listed. That's one of the key questions in our interviews. Their bank activities, which apps they use to collect money or to transfer money. We interviewed people who were caught essentially because their bank transfers have been monitored in Turkey, so that the party state was aware which bank they were using and what they were spending their money on. And of course, family interviews, and this includes a sort of interview template to interview the families of Uyghurs in the homeland, really focusing on who they know, who they talk to, daily associations, daily activities. It's really, all these documents really point to the way the party state isn't necessarily targeting individuals, it's targeting families. That's really family governance, uses the phrase sensitive family backgrounds repeatedly to describe the need to monitor someone. It's not saying they've done anything individually, they just come from a sensitive family background. Some of the police notes we used really do go into that in more detail, how to monitor the communications of those sensitive families. They also, there's a reminder list, it says a contract to be signed by people who are abroad. It's to be co-signed with their local police station, and it's specific that this binds citizens to party regulations while abroad, not just Chinese law, but all party regulations. So they're governing people while they're abroad. It also goes into great detail how to ask specific questions in interviews, very basic questions. How do you know this person? What do you talk about? They do list 26 dangerous countries. The people who are visited are to be monitored more intensively. These include Turkey and Thailand. They also include 35 types of people to be documented, but it also specifically states that everyone who goes abroad is to be documented, and the families of everyone who goes abroad are to be monitored. The Rimouski police notes we've been using, these were given to us by Jean Benin of the Xinjiang Victims Database. These are very large files, 50,000 pages of communications. But the reason we were really using it was that they contain specific information on cases of people in Turkey, Thailand, and the UK, really describing in not in great detail, but just very banal language, monitoring someone's family, they're behaving normally, or they behave abnormally, we need to do another risk assessment. There's even a British citizen, and it includes a passport number, and they've been in Britain for some time, and how the mother walks around their garden in the evening, and who they walk with. This is described as normal, a normal walk around the garden. So turning to our field sites, these are very, very different contexts, and it really shapes the results we got. One of the key factors in the United Kingdom is low population numbers of Uyghur diaspora. Most people are concentrated in London, a large community there. The people we'd interview in Northern England, small towns, were really talking about how they had no Uyghur friends, very isolated and so on. This became a very important issue about how to protect their rights. One of the key issues that comes up in interviews in the UK was not that the UK government could collaborate with China, but that they won't do anything to protect their rights. So people felt unsure what their rights were and what if they would be protected if they speak out, essentially. You can see on the survey results, I mean, this is a small number of people surveyed, but it does give us a general pattern of what people experience. Around 2/3 report threats to their well-being in the UK. Around 2/3 report being offered to be able to return home or have contact with family in return for changes in their behaviour, end advocacy, particularly. Most of this within the UK seems focused on key activists, which is quite different from the Turkish case. Most interviewees asked us, many asked who they call and threaten. There's a lack of rights awareness, but this is, essentially the way to combat that is simply with information, civil rights information. That people didn't know what to do if they faced transnational repression, so many people we talked to hadn't shared their stories with anyone. One middle-aged man, actually expressed great relief at the end of the interview. He said he's never told the story to anyone, and he would never dare tell it to another Uyghur. Essentially, he was scared of human surveillance.
I'm going to take the urgent issues. The case in the United Kingdom is the most urgent issue is we need to have official outreach programs. We have mentioned that in the United States, the FBI at least reach out to the Uyghur community so if the Uyghur has been facing this, they at least know where to report this, and they will have the access to these programmers. So we're suggesting that the UK government should also have this kind of programs, and at least for the Uyghur people, they know where they can report this, and also very important for them to understand what is the TNR and where to report it. And most important is the government have a very clear legal information of what is TNR. This is not only sending message to the Uyghur diaspora community in UK, also to the Chinese government, especially the Xinjiang Authority. Police keep calling people in the UK. Some of them are UK citizens and asking them to send their personal information to them. This is not okay. So it's important for the UK government sending this, have a clear definition of what is the TNR and what is the legal method for the Uyghur community can rely on. And another thing is having access to the public funding space. It have a specifically designed, for example, like what's the accountable course, so Uyghur community can look at them, study them, and know what is the thing they're facing and probably gonna facing and where to reach out. Also, one of the things as Hoda has mentioned that when Uyghur people facing this TNR in the UK from the Xinjiang police, they don't dare to share this to other Uyghur in their community. I'm going to quote one of the interviews that if they can reach out to me, they can definitely reach out to other Uyghur. And it wouldn't take so long for the people who drag me into this house to know how much I hate them. So he doesn't feel safe to talking to other Uyghur and share his ordeal, and he doesn't know where to get any support.
Even as you see in the survey results as well, only half of Uyghurs surveyed report feeling safe in the UK, which is quite striking. asked what would make you safer, what would you recommend to fix this problem, like most countries we worked in, the right to residence permanent status was key. When we look at the way that tallies with other questions about political influence, it also becomes clearer that people want the right to residence in a state that can withstand pressure from heritage. And the reason the civil rights protection issue is so important is that Uyghurs need an official stamp to say this is your rights and this is how we will protect you. The rights practice is just a really great handbook that does outline all these rights, but it's not an official government leaflet. That's what people want to know straight from the government that they will be protected.
I'm going to add one thing. Currently, the Uyghur refugee is getting a ground status process is way too long, and one of the issues that we have been waiting 2.5 years to get any status. And I don't think this is just a case in the UK. We know how difficult for the Uyghur refugee get their refugee status approved. And before they get that, none of them feel actually safe. And then we have been hearing people who have citizenship facing this threat. So imagine those who doesn't have any legal status in the UK. I'm going to share two case studies that we interviewed around 69 in the United Kingdom, and then we selected two. The first one is anonymous. He's a Uyghur man. The TMR that he has been facing actually started when he was in Turkey, and this harassment never stopped even until he's in the UK. He received harassment call from the state security police, Antenju, in Xinjiang, and he shared smart enough, like he recorded everything for when the Xinjiang police harassed him. So he shared access to us, so we were able to transcribe the recording. In one of them is this national security police, he explicitly named the 4 prominent Uyghur activists who were in the UK. And 2 of them was holding British citizenship, 2 of them are European citizenship. And those conversations you can see in our report, the instruction is very clear, and he will coach him and tell him how to approach to the Uyghur activists. For example, the police will say, you can just approach to him, said, when I take him to the dinner. And this guy, he doesn't want to do that. So he said, I cannot afford it. I'm a refugee here. I don't have a job. And then I don't have income. And then this national security police will say, oh, then you can go to this specific Uyghur restaurant in the UK and ask him to borrow money to you. If he doesn't do that, then I'm going to call his family in Xinjiang. So he will definitely lend money to you. So, and then he was also asked to monitoring the BBC. And the police said every time before the 2 sessions or this big meeting in China, and BBC will have some interviews, some Uyghur, this is their pattern. So you better be monitoring the BBC News website every day to make sure what kind of news they are publishing. And this guy said, I don't have good internet, and then police said, and you better go to some place has good internet. And later he just directly asked, why don't you just go to the BBC building to see if any Uyghur has been going there to put the interview. And this police also said one thing, look, you have better internet than us. We have difficult access to the BBC News, so you are in the UK, why don't you look at the internet?
Crazy.
And one thing strikes me was this national security police coached him, said, in order to earn the Uyghur community trust, you can go to the protest. You can stand there, you can shout with them, you can protest, but you do not cross the red line, which is do not accept any journalist request for the interview. You do not help the journalist to draw more attention on the Xinjiang. This is the red line you cannot cross. And if the Uyghur community, Uyghur activists asking you to do the interview, then you just call the journalist and tell the Uyghur community, Uyghur activists that if you talk to the journalist, and then your parents will have trouble. So use this. And he also instructs the guys that you specifically use the other people's sympathy to earn their connection to help you to reach out to other people or other organizations. Another case is, this is a very well-known case, Otabar. He's a Kazakh ethnic. Most of you probably already know. He is a camp survivor. Before he was released from camp, he has to sign an affidavit with the Chinese government to promise he won't release any information about the camp system. So he did. And the reason he could be released because the Kazakhstan's government intervened with this. And after he arrived at the Kazakhstan, that he received a police phone call from the Altai in Xinjiang says like, when are you coming back? And then later when he talked to the journalist, then the Xinjiang police called him and said, why are you talking to the journalist? Didn't you sign the affidavit? Don't you want to think about your family still here? So he said, I'm just telling the truth what happened to me. And later this is where the Kazakhstan authority kicked in. He got a phone call from Kazakh police in Kazakhstan, said, why are you talking to the journalist? Didn't you sign an affidavit with the Xinjiang police? So he gets, like, I signed the affidavit with the Chinese government. I didn't sign with Kazakhstan government. Why are you doing this to me? And then the police said, Kazakhstan and China have a good relationship, so it's our obligation to protect you. Don't you feel, you cannot just feel safe because you're in Kazakhstan. And eventually he agreed to do the testimony at the visit tribunal. He got repeatedly, like 2 or 3 times call. I don't recall the specific number, but like every day before he do the interview, the testimony at the visit tribunal, and this harassment stopped it after he did the testimony. The problem is, the key point is here is the Kazakhstan government, the police are the ones who calling him to stop him to do the testimony at the visit tribunal.
Okay, so on to Turkey, very different environment. Obviously the political context is very different. Facing authoritarianism in Turkey, confidence in civil rights, growing anti-racist sentiment among elites. But in terms of the Uyghur community, the big difference in the UK is high population numbers. Estimates go up to 60,000 people. And it's a large community, traditionally seen as a safe haven. But what we found was a lot of people discussing how they felt unsafe. One of the things that makes it safe for Uyghurs in Turkey is being able to access the humanitarian visa system they have, which doesn't solve the problem, the permanence of this problem. This is a 2-year system that's rolling, you have to reapply. But Uyghurs are able to obviously go through Turkish consulates in different countries due to their Turkic ancestry. So we found many people who had been human trafficked, who were smuggled, and they were even rescued in Southeast Asian countries by essentially someone at a consulate who took sympathy on them and helped them out. So it's really by discretion. It's not a rule that they had to do that, but they went out of their way to help them. Most people discussed their hopes of citizenship in Turkey. You can see there's an even higher proportion of people receiving threats. 4/5 of people are receiving threats, 2/3 threats to their family's well-being, and 2/3 being offered, or sorry, over a third being offered contact their family to collect information on people. So most people would talk about citizenship as the number one thing that makes them safe, and particularly those on expiring humanitarian visas. However, many people did say, even with citizenship, I'm not safe. That can be revoked, I could be deported. We talked to one business owner who had a family who lived in Istanbul for a number of years, seemed to have a good life. He said openly, I'm going to pay human traffickers to get me to Europe. When we said that is not that, we don't think that will make you safe to be human trafficked, he said you do not understand what life is like. Human surveillance became a very important issue that we will talk about in this environment. Really low-level intelligence gathering. This isn't, we're not talking about professional spies. Essentially, we're talking about ordinary Uyghurs being harassed by Chinese police to collect information on their own community, being offered things share the conversations recorded and so on with us. It really did start to become clear that the harassment stopped for most people when they refused to cooperate. This does not mean that repression stops. Their family will be under surveillance. The family may be used in terms of as coercion by proxy and so forth, and they will be under surveillance. One of the women who refused to cooperate, she also shared videos with us of her being followed. So she was still being followed, but she wasn't being harassed.
The urgent issues in the Uyghur diaspora community in Turkey is, the first one is their expired humanitarian visas. Uyghur people who hold this humanitarian residency, the term is just for 2 years. After 2 years, they need to renew, and we have heard people are even afraid to go to the immigration office to renew this. And some of them applied for the long-term residency, long-term residencies and get denied, didn't get give any legal reason. And some of them who has long-term residency applied for the citizenship and also get denied, which didn't get any legal reasons. And if the humanitarian visas get expired and if they don't get renewed this, which means that we cannot legally stay in the Turkey and we could be faced with deporting back. And another dangerous signal is because we don't have legal residency in the Turkey, which means the Chinese government, especially police from Entity or Guanti, can fly to the Turkey and take these people back to China. Which one of the case we interviewed the woman, she told us that her husband was Chinese citizenship, has Chinese passport, and more police from the Guanti or Antwerp, I'm sorry, I don't remember, but police took the husband to the hotel, and 4 days later, the husband disappeared. He has been deported, not deporting back, it's like the police conducting back to the China. So the urgent issue here is if the Uyghur people cannot get renewed their residency, especially with humanitarian visa, it should have a safe passage to the third countries. And another thing is our interviews has been shared us that it's a common knowledge that there's like Chinese paid agents, like informant or spies, are living freely in the community. And what is it could good that the Turkish government could arrest this paid Chinese surveillance agent. And some of them who has been arrested are then being released after 2 days, and there's no further press charges has been pressed. The last one is outreach and support from UNHCR. When we write email to the UNHCR, so you guys know the Tobin's email is from the university, which means it's not from spam email. So when we send email to them, it's important that our email is being blocked. If you have an authority email account to contact them, you couldn't reach out. So imagine Uyghur people sending them with Gmail or with their own whatever emails they're using. And another interview, his humanitarian visas is going to be expired. At that time, was like only have 5 or 6 days left. So he was desperately wanted to reach out to them. So he drove all the way from Istanbul to the Ankara, and then when he arrived there, the address doesn't match with what there's no office. And so he went to another place and turns out it's a camp for the refugees from Syria. And the person who is in charge there told him that we don't take any bigger case. If you want to get this, you need to talk to the Turkish immigration office, which the case is this guy is afraid to talk to the Turkish authorities.
Yeah, the email issue was a surprise to the UNHCR. The UNHCR bounced back blank. Tried it again, bounced back blank. And so did the OHCHR, bounced back blank, but I got the email address for OHCHR field van that supposedly investigates cases in Ankara, in Istanbul, and that was the one that just mean, one of the key things that's different here in terms of comparing with the UK, like I said, Uyghurs in the UK feel that they might not be supported and the government won't take any actions. So there's no accusations of collaboration. Many of the people we were interviewing were worried about collaboration with Turkish police. People being detained for weeks and not questioned or interrogated, just detained with no reason given. Their business, that person's business was shut down. They re-registered, that was shut down. Now they can't re-register at all. Another man who wanted us to help him find a means to permanent status, who's asking us to contact the UHRP, he reported to being followed by German police, or sorry, Turkish police.
We interviewed more than 20 Uyghur individuals in Turkey. We selected 2 people who were willing to do the interview with their own name. The first one is Yasin Öztürk. He is a Turkish citizen. In 2023, in February, he's a barber. So when he was doing his business in the shop, a barber shop, and then a Uyghur man came in and started filming him and taking a picture. And then when he and other Uyghur customers crashed on him, and so this guy, the informant, gave his phone and called everything. And then he followed every conversation between this spy or informant with the Xinjiang police. In all this audio, you can hear clearly that how police are instructed and coached the spy to film Uyghur people, to picture of them, and also doesn't leave any space for the informant to refuse. First, he was asking to film a specific person's wedding, to ask him like who is the bride, who has been to the wedding, all this detail. And when the informant said, I couldn't do this because I'm surrounding people, and then immediately this police standing, he said, then why don't you go, what about the barber shop? Go there to take a picture of him and look at who are going, entering to this, doing business with him. And another thing that another audio he shared with us, also we get full access, was the conversation between his wife and police from their hometown. And this was happened in 2018. There were 2 police was harassing his wife, and for years. And eventually we just couldn't stand it, so she confronted with the police. And when the low rank officers telling her like, we have been I went to your home, I took a picture of your family, and you see I'm so busy, but I'm still, caring about you. You should think about who would do this. And when he realized this woman recorded everything there, so he reported to his superior. And now that his superior came in and said, I know you reported about my colleague's conversation between you. I'm going to tell you, if you release this, you share this with any journalist, then I will personally mark you in your file that you are leaking the state's secrets. And he also mentioned that if every journalist talking about Xinjiang are just fabricated news, it's fake news, all of this, and he said, if what you're saying or the journalist saying about this is true, then why the United Nations didn't send any investigation team coming to here? We don't have any reason to come here because everything is fine here. He repeatedly used the United Nations as an excuse to fresh on this couple and telling her that there's no place she can seek any justice for herself because United Nations didn't send any investigation team there because UN is not standing up for yourself. Anything to add on?
We were surprised by how local police were using the international context to leverage pressure on Uyghurs. That quote that the United Nations obviously before Michelle Bachelet's report. But some of the police were also saying things like people are reporting on other people's families, scholars and journalists, and are not reporting on yours, and so that makes you in danger, and they're using that as a threat. Another thing to point out briefly is, I was asked the question, what does the party state consider success long-term goal, but we did see examples of like sort of banal, small forms of success, the conversations we were shown with Xinjiang police. One of the phone data that we were given by a guy who was an informant and had been captured and took his phone, the conversations were really clear about what was not acceptable. That had not good enough picture because you don't have the person's face in full, really close-up shot, and they're saying I can't go that close or I'll get in trouble. We don't care. So that was really success, just basically clear pictures of people's daily activities and their associations. That also matched up in the police notes that we used. Frequently, the notes were referring to photographs being taken by informants. In the UK case, this was photographs of World Uyghur Congress meetings or protests and leading activists in Turkey. It was just ordinary people.
Another case is not thinking of that. He has a long-term residence. His case is very clear that the police directly contacted him, asking to monitoring the Uyghur inspection. And he said, I'm not going to do that. And first the police will reach out to him on the WeChat, so he blocked the police. Later, then somehow the police reach out to him on the WhatsApp, and the Xinjiang police, the number they're using are the Turkish number. But first the police are in the south, yeah, in Xinjiang. And then the police says, you inform him how many of his family has been sentenced, and he specifically mentioned his sons and his wife. And the police first sent a picture of his wife. She was already half paralyzed, and sending a picture to him. And then later, police reached out to him. Send a video call, and the entire time the police didn't show his face, but in this video call, he saw his son with a police uniform, and behind the son's picture was saying like,评价是他无尽的改造动力. Your love is his endless motivation for his transformation. And the son with the prison uniform tells me that I'm fine. I will do everything. I will confess. I will behave good. I will try to become a good citizen. And later he asked the police, "What do you want?" And police said, "Simply, just send all the information and the pictures of people in your community to me." So eventually he refused, and he never had any access to his wife, to his son. He doesn't have any communication access to any of his family. And majority of his family are already sentenced and are serving time in prison.
Yeah, we didn't ever ask people to share these pictures of their family, but they usually wanted to when we talked to us. Mostly some of these interviews were hours in length, so people sharing the stuff they were finding a significant amount of time with them. It did seem, even when they were talking about people being imprisoned, and torture, and people being given traffic across multiple countries, this showing that those pictures seemed to be the most traumatic part for them. That was what they found hardest. But that was when men who said, I don't cry, I never cry, I don't like to cry, that was when they were saying, I might have to cry.
One of the cases we didn't mention in our report because this person he just wants to do everything anonymously. The video he shared us is really horrifying that the police asking her daughter singing a song and telling her, greeting her father, which is normal people, any of us in this room, this is not normal in Western world. We don't greeting our family in Western countries through the police or filming a video. And when this couple shared this video with us, the desperate and the devastating, that kind of image is just haunting your face. Nobody deserves this kind of life. Nobody. And I really don't know how I'm going to do, how we can help these people. This is beyond family separation. This is the Chinese government using people's family as a hostage. This is a long arm, and without government's help, without any legal information, clear information on, or having any bill, I don't think there's clear strategy or tactic to protect the Uyghur community in any of the country.
So, on to the last case, Thailand, which we did not visit. We had intended to spend time there, but it gradually became evident that we would be more productive returning to Turkey to Kayseri, where we can interview people who have passed through Turkey. We interviewed numerous people who had been trafficked to get to Turkey, but also people who had been in the immigration detention centres, including one person who escaped. Obviously, Thailand is seen as a safe haven for refugees, but I would argue that the government's strategy here is changing under influence from China. 2019 to 22 National Security Plan is very, very aware of transnational threats. It uses that language repeatedly, talks about drugs, human trafficking, prostitution, etc., but it does not use the phrase transnational repression once. The drafting history of the document actually describes Uyghurs and Rohingya as having special security issues that affect international relationships. So they've been highlighted out as a potential threat. It does also say that all refugees are potential threats. It uses that language, but it really hones in on these specific groups. As you can see in the picture, you may have seen online, this is just the e-visa application form. To go to Thailand, if your place of birth is China, you're not asked what your ethnicity is, you're asked, is your ethnicity Uyghur? So it's really targeting Uyghurs and essentially racializing their own asylum procedures or their own policy. Very few people it was evident very few people actually living in Thailand. Most people are in the IBCs. Also, most people reported experiencing no transnational repression because they were being smuggled. The human traffickers took our phones and they kept them while we were there, so we couldn't be contacted. So we had to work through that in interviews because people were saying we didn't have any transnational repression experiences. But this became a bigger issue and a more pressing humanitarian issue. Immigration detention centres, which we'll show you. Obviously, this has been in the news for Congress. Obviously, put a very strong clear statement about the man who died in the IBC. We were given images of these camps, detention centres. We're not going to share. We're only going to share the ones that are in public. They're already in public. We were given fairly gruesome pictures of people dying, and we're not sure that really is worthwhile sharing. We think the image we have, which is publicly available, this is inside an IBC, should tell enough of the story for people to understand what this experience is like. You can see there's extremely cramped conditions, people living in very close quarters, no sanitary space for sanitary equipment, and obviously no room for infectious disease control either. We didn't find any evidence that people were of torture, but we did interview people who said they would be beaten, they would be, if they misbehaved according to the guards would use the cell bullies to beat them up, and they would only intervene if they were nearly dead. They would beat them very, very badly.
Urgent issues. Uyghur refugee in IBC in Thailand have access to nothing. They need urgent humanitarian and legal access. Some of them have been sick for years and there's no treatment. One of the interviews told me that, for example, he tried to escape twice, and during one of his escaping, he harmed one of his part of his body, hamstring, and he didn't get any treatment for years. And they have no legal access. They couldn't register on the UNHCR, and they don't get any access to to any of the NGO. He also said like they don't have any, they do not enjoy the same rights as other ethnic. People from other ethnic can have the access to, for example, the phone or having like their local, their ethnic local to visit them, which is doesn't enjoy. Uyghur people cannot share this, so we haven't seen any Uyghur organization having access to the Uyghur, not even journalists, no, nothing. And they don't have any access to the lawyer, literally nothing. And they have been living in this kind of condition for over 9 years. And so far we have 3 Uyghur refugees died in IDC. The youngest one is almost 3 years old. Solution is UNHCR. They must to have this Uyghur can register on their refugee system, and they must provide legal access. Also, they need this like secure passage and full access to the lawyer. When you don't have a lawyer, this is just really difficult to understand. I mean, any country, even in China, you have a right for majority Chinese people. You have a right to access to the lawyer. But in here, they don't have any access in Thailand. And solution is immigration quotas. This requires probably multiple government working together to give the quotas to the Uyghur in Thailand and get them to the safety country.
What was slightly different about in terms of the politics of this case? Some Uyghurs interviewed in Turkey were concerned that Uyghurs had been used as a bargaining chip by the government, and they were being used. In this case, it does appear more that the Thai government does not know what to do. It says it doesn't want to anger China or the US, so it is unsure what to do about this issue. So that's why we think UHRP should step in.
We choose 2 case studies in Thailand as well. Both of them, because the case is so sensitive, so both of them are anonymous. The first, she's a female, and her husband has been in the IDC for over 9 years. For over 9 years, her husband and other 49 Uyghur men have still not been registered with UNHCR. She shared her experiences in Thailand women's shelters. At that time, she was pregnant, and the Thai authority asked her son, elderly son, 2 years old, not stayed in the women's shelter. Instead, they stayed in the IDC. So she couldn't meet her son for over a year. So in 2015, finally, when the Turkish government welcomed 170 refugee come to Turkey, the quota was mainly most focused on the women and children. So when she finally met her son, he doesn't recognize her anymore, and he was screaming, shouting, and asking for the father. When she's saying like, repeatedly telling him that I'm your mother, but the kid just won't believe it. And when we were doing the interview, I saw her son, and he asked me, well, who can help me to meet my dad, like meet my father? The place he's staying is not is bad. And I couldn't answer that question. It's beyond my power. So we hopefully, like Western government, especially United States government, can work with other governments to try to get these people out of the IDC, and hopefully one day they can be united with their families in Turkey. Another case, this guy, he was detained in a different detention facility for over 8 years. He tried to escape twice, and both times he got caught. So totally he served like 27 months prison time. On the entire imprisonment, he was shackled, and he told me like for other prisoners they were only for 5 months, but for us for whole prison time for 27 months. And he never had the same right as other ethnic groups in IDC either, as I mentioned earlier, like no access to anything. He said chance to meet the people from the UN. So I asked why. He said, I don't know, it's because they don't want to see us or they cannot see us. We never had access to them. And when I asked about the TNR he faced in Thailand, he told me that Thai government forbids other government authority office or any of the NGO or organization to get access to them, but they will allow Chinese government officials to visit Uyghur detainees in the name of doing research. And during this interview, the Chinese officers were asked and said, you said you are not from China, but we know you are from China, and your family are suffering because of you. Do you miss your family? If you don't want to, your family continue to suffer this, all you have to do is just continue from China. And he told me that we know what the consequences we're going to face if we admit we're from China. So none of us admit that, but they have Chinese officials to give this pressure on the Uyghur detainees in the IDC.
Okay, so let's conclude. I mean, we really find that transinterpretation is universal in the Uyghur diaspora. Everyone is experiencing it in some form. We've just written as near universal because it does vary by state to state, and it does vary by individual to individual, but it is affecting everyone. There's a deep impact on civil rights. Obviously, even in the UK, people are uncomfortable sharing their stories publicly. They're uncomfortable going online. People saying, I will tell you this story, but I'm not ever going to tell anyone else. Even speaking to people who are more outspoken, they would say, no, it's not changed my behaviour. I speak out, but then in private they will talk about things they do have to do differently. There is also an issue, is the way the party state is actually exporting its model of genocide inside China is really the thinking behind all this, that it's to block or to prevent Uyghur cultural maintenance. China's goals really are breaking Uyghur cultural connections abroad with the homeland, but also controlling public opinion on the subject, making sure that people don't talk about this, don't share their stories, and that no academic research can be conducted in this area. I won't go through the cases. You can take more questions on them in Q&A, but the changing patterns we really note. We're not saying that transnational repression has decreased. We're just saying tactics have significantly changed. We do think that there's increased surveillance, but the way that people were not being harassed when they refused to cooperate with the party state to conduct surveillance really did seem a new pattern in the sense that their harassment had stopped. They were being left alone, but they were still under surveillance. So they're still facing repression, but it's a very different situation. It's not straightforward, just increasing threats since 2017. We think the party state essentially has tracked who they think are trustworthy and untrustworthy. That's also in police notes, the discussion of abnormalities and normalities. Recommendations?
Immigration quotas. We have been, the interviews in Turkey repeatedly mentioned about the Canadian quota, and then they keep asking us how can we go to the Canada, who are they going to select? So we have to keep telling them like the Canadian government has to decide which people is going to the Canada, and then several of them said, only Canada accept us? Why another country won't give us the quotas? It's just 10,000. We have more than 50,000 here, and none of us feeling safe here, especially for those who are willing to go to the Western world, a Western country, more safety country. And another is the civil rights outreach. Again, I think the different national governments should have a clear definition or handbook, legal definition of how to protect the Uyghur community in different countries. Without government's clear information and legal method here, I don't think this will
and those individuals had no attachment to Canada in any way. It was just a safe haven. So we do think both the quotas and the civil rights out of each issue is needing an official stamp from government to say we will not give in to pressure from the Chinese government and we will keep you safe here. The security hotline is essentially a cheap, it's a cheap win. It can be integrated into existing security platforms. Really, a number to call when people face transnational repression. Essentially, people would ask us where do we call, who do we call. In the UK, when a person was being harassed, it was a bit vague, or the police could do anything. Once he received a physical threat, then they said they could act. If we can get, comes under criminal law, we can act. But this information should be shared with government to be able to deal with it. It has to be anonymous at the point of phone, but then you can arrange to people. That's just common sense. Magnitsky sanctions that we recommend. This is for individual perpetrators of transnational repression, people who actually do the harassment. These are low-hanging fruit. These are not important political leaders. The political costs of doing this is quite low, but it does send a signal that we cannot conduct transnational repression in our states. But it's also, Uyghurs were sharing pictures of the policeman that harasses them. A lot of people would do this. They know who they are. They know their badge numbers. They would say, this is the man who follows my family. Some camp survivors have also gone public with their images. So people have those images and some of them want to share them. The police notes we use actually includes the responsible officer's name and their badge number and phone number that are actually responsible for individual cases. So the information is there. It's just a case of finding a safe mechanism to share. Then for UN agencies, we'll just go through this briefly. Really would like call on the UNHCR, conduct outreach in Turkey, to investigate kinds of harassment, and particularly to try and work with those who are on humanitarian visas and feel that it would be threatening to their lives to approach the authorities. We encountered numerous people in those situations within several days. So the outreach shouldn't be too hard. It should not be too hard to do. OHCHR and HCR have overlapping responsibilities, but we've called in OHCHR to gain access to the IDCs in Thailand. People in there are in urgent need of medical attention. They need legal access. Lawyers want to visit the IDCs, they're not able to. NGOs on the ground want to get inside the IDCs to provide food, to provide nutrition, and support. This should be enabled by the OHCHR. It's its job. CERD, Committee for Elimination of Racial Discrimination, last year described the racial discrimination towards Uyghurs both inside China and outside as alarming. So we would like to know what actions they're going to take to deal with that. And lastly, for the UN, obviously we'd like to hear more from the results of the Batchelor report, what actions are going to be taken, is there going to be follow-up research. We'd recommend that more expert research is actually included in that report. A lot of scholars have produced key information that on sterilisation were not referenced, it's not included. We don't know why that is. We think there's a lot of information that they've missed out that should be in there, but we'd like to know what they're going to do. But we also recommend appointing a special rapporteur for TNR. The rights abuses that come under transnational repression are already covered in international law. We don't necessarily need new laws, new institutions, but we do need a mechanism to be able to collect information and to be able to assess the levels of transnational repression people experience, because security agencies aren't necessarily equipped to deal with issues of family separation, that offer incentives to conduct surveillance. So we need China-specific, Uyghur-specific expertise at the UN to work with our rapporteur for TNR. And that's where we're at.
So I'll open up for the but if there's anything about the presentation specifically, please raise your hand.
I have a question, but it's a wee bit niche, so if you want to follow up one-to-one afterwards, that's fine. So I'm Chloe, based in the UK, so I have a UK-specific question. As I said, we can follow up. I'd be interested to know if you've engaged with the UK government on the report, or if you plan to, and if you have, what their response would be. And I would flag to the audience that this sits in within a broader context in the UK of an increasingly hostile regime towards all migrants and refugees. And so I think you have that added complication for the Uyghur population as well.
Well, to be entirely transparent, the funding for all the research came from
The UK.
Came from the UK, China International Programme. So they funded the research. They didn't really give me a steer. I expected them to want more from me, but they did. They want independent research. So they specifically said, no, we don't want to tell you what to do. I would really want you to do this yourself and then present it to us. So the funding comes there. We have presented it to actors from the Foreign Office and Home Office, and we know this issue will be primarily viewed through a security lens on human rights. Tom Cunningham, Security Minister, is deeply interested in this issue, has spoken out greatly on issues that affect UK national security. But what we really are doing is that those security interests and Uyghur human rights now converge. They're in the same place. The need to support Uyghurs with community outreach, with information on TNR is related to national security. Isolated individuals tend to make irrational decisions. So it's in the UK's national security interest to actually support the human rights of Uyghurs. That's the argument we've made. We know that the immigration quotas will fall on some deaf ears. We know whilst writing this report, there's lots of discussion about the issue of people arriving in boats. So we know that immigration quotas will trigger some resistance, but we do stress the quotas issue is not about numbers. It doesn't have to be 10,000. It's about making a clear statement that Uyghurs can come here and be safe. So we hope that that will be listened to. I don't think we would fund the research if they were possible.
So I have a follow-up on that. Thank you, Chloe. Louise Agreement from UHRP. So you're also doing some briefings in Washington. Can you tell us about your policy points that you think will have the greatest impact also here for the U.S.?
I'm not going to
We also, the briefings we've done are closed sessions, so we can't discuss the nature of the conversations, but since we actually present the report, we present the recommendations. I expect some of the response to be quite similar to the UK. The issue of P2 status in the US has been raised a lot, fast-tracking the asylum procedures. That's something that would be very difficult to pass through Congress. People will say it's difficult to have that much political capital to spend. So we know that's a difficult issue. There's nothing that we can do about that. So we would expect the immigration quotas recommendation to be, to fall in a mix of responses, I would expect. But I think it's possible that people will follow Canada's lead on that. I do expect the magnitsky sanctions, stick, instead of the carrot, to be of interest, definitely. Obviously, the difference in the UK and the US is the US is larger power. It's able to exercise its will more freely. The UK, not just the UK, but looking at Thailand, Turkey, what we're seeing is medium-sized powers that are anxious about this and don't want to step out of this. They don't want to anger the US. They also don't want to anger China. I don't think that sentiment isn't necessarily in the UK government, but obviously the UK has considerably less leverage over China than the US. So we do think the US should and can lead, and then other states can work with them. But it is powers and smart and figure out how to make it in their interests to work on it. There's no point in just telling the Thai government about my values and why they should release people. That won't work. So we need to make it more costly for them to keep those people in detention than to allow them safe passage.
Well, first of all, congratulations on your terrific work. I personally have been living through the transnational repression for about 20 years now, so I know how it feels, and I can relate to the experience that the people that you interviewed shared with you. And thank you both for this important work. My question, the recommendations that you listed are all great, but something is missing in there. Law enforcement and diplomatic consequence. That would be more effective. When you talk to the law enforcement, one excuse that they always try to use to push back is, well, they're not here. But we do know where they are, who they are. And their bosses travel around the world. There should be a visa ban. There should be diplomatic consequences for the people who are planning, executing, expending this behavior. And also, maybe please comment on that if you could. And I would like you to bring this up when you engage with both UK and US government officials. That's very important. Talk is cheap. What is the action? When you listen to our top officials here, they talk about we have to do something. What have you done? There's no specific example. What is good for those 65 Chinese Christians are good for Uyghurs as well. We're talking about years of imprisonment. I get involved in those Christians' case. I supported, I engaged, I pushed. It worked. So our governments could do something meaningful. So that's one thing. The other thing is that this should be treated as a national security sovereignty concern. I don't understand why people are not taking this seriously. Is it because of some Muslim people crying out loud for help? I mean, there's a lot of hypocritical approach on this. So I would appreciate your comment. If you can't, I understand that as well. But these are the two things that we should be publicly, consistently call on our government officials, specifically law enforcement and diplomatic community, to take action.
Thank you very much for the question. It's very important. I think some of this comes down to lack of expertise and awareness of this, and the issue is kind of growing rapidly, and now people are catching on. Yeah, there are issues that you described about racism, of course, Islamophobia, of course, these are massive issues everywhere in the world. And yet it does mean, in general, the genocide wasn't the first. Absolutely, of course. I also think it's hard to believe some of the stories that we've told for people. It really is difficult for people to understand this stuff when they are removed from it. I mean, obviously I'm not Uyghur, so I won't face these things, but I know people who it affects their lives, so I can see and feel that to some extent. But when I tell those stories to people who don't know this stuff, you have to explain for a long, long time. If you just bring it up, and most people won't believe you. And I think that means that there's been very little sort of public advocacy towards this. Not obviously there's tremendous successes from Uyghur-led civil society, but there's not enough action from NGOs and from student groups. For example, where students not interested in this issue. That's a big problem that has to be tackled in a smart way. Islamophobia and racism does need to be called out in that context, definitely. In terms of diplomatic consequences, I think that's a hard one to sell. It's not saying that you're wrong. It's very difficult to say there should be diplomatic consequences. I think the US should lead on that. The US would have to do that first before anyone else would. It's a hard sell. We did try to make the recommendations we asked specifically asked what do you recommend. Some people said independent. We didn't include that because we don't think it's a realistic recommendation for the UK government to do anything about. So that's, but I do agree with you about the consequences, particularly for those who are, well, people are saying, well, being involved in directly constructing campuses. Absolutely. And I think the US will meet. The law enforcement issue does come up in conversations, both with the ASRA about what they do, but also with government officials asking, well, what can we do? We're not always sure. You're absolutely right, it's a sovereignty issue, and that's, I think, why it's taking off. People are starting to realise how serious this is. I think it's unclear what laws to use. There's nothing we can do about family separation. We don't know what to do about that in the pictures. I mean, like I said, some of the pictures we showed of people's families, that seems to be the most traumatizing moments for the community. But those are the things that governments don't know what to do about. So in a sense, it's looking for the pressure points that they can do something about. At what point does that violate an existing law? Or should we have a new law?
Just a quick follow-up on that. U.S. is considering a new law. You're right that the existing laws are not sufficient to address this. One other area I forgot to mention, the tools that they're using for transnational repression are owned by the companies that have a business presence in the UK and the United States. They're under our jurisdiction. Case in point, parent company for VChat, a business presence of iFlyTech that produces voice sampling, Hikvision. They have presence all around the world, specifically in the countries like the United States and the UK. That is also one area that we should consider pushing for governmental action.
I agree.
About law enforcement, in Sweden, you probably know in 2012 or in 2011, Swedish government sentenced Uyghur spies who has been constantly sending Uyghur information in, And the reason Swedish government can do that because we have a law about the refugees espionage, which is this law doesn't exist in other countries, it doesn't exist in the US. So I think it's very important to have a clear law that about this, so it won't just only sending a clear message to the Uyghur community that like there's a law can protect you. Also a very strong message to the Chinese authority. You do this to the Uyghur community, you will face the law, the consequences of this. Sometimes it is the law to protect the most weak people. Without law, like you said, talk is just cheap. So yes, you're right. It's really important to have a clear law about this. And in Sweden, we have the law. So hopefully, US can also consider about this.
It does need to push, I mean, there's lots of other examples. I mean, the forced labour, the UK Prison Labour Act, that it seems the most relevant, was written in 1897. It's not obviously fit to deal with the procedure.
I have one question and comment. So far, first of all, thank you so much for your work. It's really impactful. I believe it will bring some positive results in the near future. So my question is, do we have any exact data or information about the location of the Chinese state police who are contacting with the Uyghurs? Or do we know who are being targeted by police mostly? The people from Kashgar or Baden, north or south? My comments. I think it needs to be done more work on the impact of CCP, TNR on Uyghurs in the diaspora, specifically individually to their mental health, collectively the trust among the community members. Because in both cases, the impact of the TNR to individuals, it's beyond our imagination. And I also believe that because of that TNR, so many people, they think that other people might be compromised by the Chinese state police. So there are very rampant distrust among people. They are still, as you said on the document, that they are, like, people are not open to talk about what's happening to their family members.
Yeah, the mental health issue is really important. I mean, we do cite the DC Culture Centre, the Culture Centre as a big model for the UK to follow. Obviously, we're trying to appeal to the need for information and civil rights, which should be shared there, but also trust building in the community, and that would impact on mental health. Obviously, we've looked at cases in Turkey and Thailand of people that are facing very egregious human rights abuses, and they're not talking about their mental health, they're talking about life or death. But that does not mean, in fact, has nothing to do with the fact that every Uyghur has to face this, and every Uyghur's mental health is challenged by that. And I'd say challenged, but friend Stacey and I feel depressed about this, and they talk about that as being a mental health problem. I don't think it's a mental health problem to be sad about that. I think that's helpful. What you do with that sadness is another matter, but I think that's helpful to be sad if you're separated from your family. So I think we need to talk about mental health in a healthy way and celebrate some of that strength. I know many people I've met in DC who have those experiences, people who have severed contact with their family themselves, with their work, to keep their family safe. It seems like a massive burden to bear, but it is also, I do also want to commend and celebrate their strength to do that. Continue the work, be brave, and that should be celebrated. And the other questions about who is targeted most, it's difficult to say in terms of which town. I mean, obviously, when you said straight away, almost everyone was from Bhutan, Kashmir, and Turkey, and yeah. So clearly that's a pattern. But also, it was clear that people were being targeted when they spoke out against China, in Turkey. It was one man made a brief YouTube video about his family, and he was immediately targeted. That was claimed without reason, evidence was taken from him. People who did not speak out were not necessarily threatened, but they were then asked to conduct surveillance. So it's clear that we're backing off people when we refuse, but people who speak out essentially are being seen as untrustworthy, so the threats sort of received, but they're then being monitored. The location of police varied. Certainly in Turkey, people would say, or they would be getting calls from China or from their hometown specifically, but also people were getting calls from Turkish numbers. But there was debate and discussion about whether that meant they were actually in Turkey or whether it was just being used to get their attention. So we can't really verify that. But people did, I mean, I think people knew when they were talking to students, essentially that quote was they would bring family in and so on. But lots of people were unsure. They were unsure if someone was calling from Turkey or not.
Any more questions? I have one. So the definitional difference between your definition of TNR and what UHRP uses, which is mostly physical sanctions or coercion, why include cultural maintenance or the disruption of it as a key element of TNR, and what are elements of cultural maintenance in this case?
The cultural maintenance part is that is essentially to break that cultural maintenance is the goal of transnational repression. This is really important in the UK, where transnational repression is being talked about as authoritarian transnational repression, and that's drawing from examples of Russian assassinations. We thought that is not, that doesn't, that's overlooking family separation, that's overlooking informants, is just the flip side of it. Saying we let you talk to your family if you do this is the same as saying we won't let you talk to your family if you do that. So it's the same thing, but it can be overlooked. People can ignore it if they're looking for the most egregious human rights abuses, physical violence. They will overlook that. And that's very important in Chinese politics. One thing that has been misunderstood about policy in the region and this issue is the way it is focused, not like Russia targeting serious and famous dissidents, but really just focusing on everyday behavior, the daily activities and documents, the family situation and monitoring. That is about ideas, not material. That is about targeting those cultural connections, developing passive culture on. We think that needs to be highlighted in this case because we think a lot of these practices will be overlooked if we're looking for assassinations and poisoning. Not that assassinations and poisoning are okay, it's just to say that there's a lot of other stuff going on that will be missed.
And so adding onto that, have you seen any acts of TNR that use international legal systems? So one of the examples you listed was Interpol and the Red Notice system for doping. There was a story in Coda Story written by Frank Event about Uyghur booksellers, and this one bookseller, Turkestani is his name, essentially Chinese authorities or there are Chinese copyright holders and they're filing complaints against him for having these public versions of books that otherwise are inaccessible to the Uyghurs. So at least that's what he claims here. So are there other examples of these kinds of TNR through international courts or international legal systems?
So the raid of the bookshop in Istanbul, that happened as we were finishing the report, so we did include that, you did mention that, but it's unclear, I mean, it's essentially unclear what Turkish law is going to be. Chinese law is going to be what Turkish law is shutting down a bookshop. No clear legal reason. Interpol, I think we've got this.
Yeah, about Interpol, yes, we can see it's very clear since 2017. The Uyghur on the red list has been increased. Currently, we know it's around 10 to 15 Uyghur are on the red list. Our report did not focus on this, but we have been running to the Uyghur who told me that he is on the red list, and he has no idea and he doesn't know why, and his life is completely destroyed. Being on the red list, an Interpol red list, which means he cannot have long-term residency in that country, and he cannot have a normal life, which also will prevent him or like jeopardize any of his legal, like for example, for the Canadian quota, it will affect him. Right now, I don't have more detail on this, but I know that there are lawyers now going to represent Uyghur who are on the red list to start to look at this. And I think what is the most important thing is, I don't know on the specific, forgive me if I'm wrong, but I think the funding on the Interpol is, forgive me if I'm wrong, so 50% is from 6 democracy countries, and but somehow Interpol become like the power being abused and serving for China and Russia. So I think it's very important for the Western government, especially this funding government, to look at the system and also talk to the Interpol and to make them to understand that like you cannot just put individual on the red list without any, like clear evidence. When this guy told me that he left China with legal pass and he entered into that country with a legal visa, but somehow he ended up on the red list and he has no idea what to do. He doesn't have any access to any powerful organization. He doesn't have money to hire a lawyer. Nothing. So right now, luckily we have a lawyer willing to look at this case, but so far I don't have more detail on this, which I hope that there will have organization or people look at this, especially the government.
that is a misperception. Party state was wanted to join WTO, presents itself as power, presents itself as a responsible power, essentially to gain international legitimacy. And that came through in interviews, asking the guy in the UK to conduct surveillance by going and visiting the independent using interviews. The fact that the local police are paying attention to what researchers are concentrating on their families and using that as leverage to say to someone, no one can help you. That shows they're paying great attention to the international context, and that they will use that international context as much as they can to achieve their goals.
Thank you.
I have one question. Are you planning to conduct a research or a report on the Uyghurs on the U.S. soil? The actual question is, what do you recommend for the individuals to cope with the TNR impacts? So we, as an Uyghur American Association, receive all the time phone calls from the community members complaining about the extraterritorial harassments, and some are very high level. Every other day police contact them, some are a smaller level. We realize that Chinese government is imprisoning, detaining our loved ones back home and imprisoning our minds here in the diaspora, and basically control our actions, silencing us in the diaspora. And so many people are afraid to ask questions or report or go for, ask for help. On the US, we have a hotline, FBI hotline, but they take reports, they document everything, but not enough actions taken so far, and that's why we need the law to pass, and so there will be further actions. For those individuals, when I receive calls, besides saying call FBI and report, what should I tell them? What do you recommend to cope with this pressure?
Firstly, friends have asked me that as well. I don't think it's my place to answer fully. I think some of these issues need to be dealt with by the community, so I would recommend people sticking together and supporting each other and creating spaces that you can talk about those things, you can share those stories, and that even if the FBI can't act, at least the mental health side is covered as safe, that you're able to tell those stories to people you trust. But that is, on an individual level, it will depend on what that person needs. We interview people who face transnational pressure, and it makes them speak out more. It makes them very fiery, and we've interviewed people who face transnational repression and will never hopefully again. It requires a lot of knowledge of an individual, how to support them, counselling if they're not willing to talk, something professional needs to do. But I do think what you have in DC is as good an environment as you can have. You have cultural centres, you have a large community that do share those things. The biggest issue in the UK was isolation. People struggling, not knowing what to do. So I can't really answer that except to say stick together and support each other and create those spaces where it's possible for people to share their problems.
I'm going to answer this question as a researcher. I would recommend Uyghur who has faced TNR, like especially getting call like this, contact the U.S. Embassy in Beijing. Ask them to raise this issue to the Beijing government. Ask them why my citizen, U.S. citizens, getting call from the local Xinjiang local police. Ask the U.S. government to ask the Chinese government why my citizen is getting phone call from the local government. This is answer from a Uyghur.
We do see when people speak, there's a danger when people speak out to become targets, but we also see that when people speak out a lot, then that actually creates international attention, and it's more difficult to actually harm our family back home. We do have cases where people are moved to safer conditions. It doesn't release them, it doesn't give them safety, but the parties they
2017, I was personally experienced the TNR directly from the local police, and they used my mom as to threaten me to have to send it over my Swedish passport. At that time in 2017, I wasn't active at all. I was literally like absolutely living my own life. So the first thing I did was like, because they're using my mom, directly threatening me, so I did. So I sent my Swedish passport, photos, everything to my mom, so she went to the local police. As a Swedish citizen at that time, I had no idea where should I reach out to, and I didn't even have that mindset that I am a Swedish citizen. I'm supposed to ask help from my own government. It was my husband who is a Swedish. He gets furious. At that time, it's not husband anyway. So he was furious, and he directly told me that you and I were now going to SAPO. SAPO is like a National Security Intelligence Office. We're going to SAPO. We are going to report this. And I said, like, what if they do nothing? You report it. They will have record. Eventually, if more people like you talk to them, and it will eventually go into under their radar. And after you talk to the SAPO, then they are going to talk to the Swedish Stockholm government, and then they will talk to the Chinese government. If you don't start with the first step, how are you supposed to expect that the Swedish government is going to protect you? So this is why I said, like, remember, you are a U.S. citizen. You should always remember that there is a government behind you, have obligation to protect you. So reach out to your government, ask them, please ask the Chinese government why they're calling me. So I think this is very important. Just talking from my personal experience.
One participant said that they would never call, they were talking about people that receive calls and whether they should call back, and people said that would put you in a position of weakness to call them and never do that. But it varies. Other people who have called it harassed them.
Yeah, we do have those kind of people to keep calling the police station. They're asking for their loved ones. Thank you.
Yeah, I have a comment, not a question, kind of following up on Elfidar's point. So sorry to give context, I work for Anti-Slavery International, so kind of a broader space, and with Elfidar actually, we've had this conversation a year ago, so I'm just going to repeat, I don't know if you remember, I'm going to repeat some of what we discussed then, but I've been in some discussions with the broader anti-slavery movement and the broader human rights movement, and actually the broader anti-torture movement about the Uyghur rights movement, because there's a lot of learnings that can be taken from these other worlds into the current situation for Uyghurs, in particular the kind of long-term depression, mental health impacts and so on. And I think there's a lot more, I'm not an expert on these other spaces, but from speaking to people who are, I think there's a lot more that can be done about, for example, taking some of the expertise about rehabilitation of torture victims to Uyghur communities, not solely people who are direct survivors of camps, but people who are also, indirect survivors, so to speak, around this kind of rebuilding solidarity of people, how to support each other, and also how to speak about these things. So I think kind of going beyond solely the transnational point, there's a lot more that can be done, and a lot more that can be done by Western governments in order to support this kind of rehabilitation approach that has been taken, for example, to other slavery victims or to torture victims and so on, even if the experiences are not directly comparable. And it's something we've raised ourselves with some governments, but I think we're at a stage yet where it doesn't really get traction because people, as David has said, are not really even understanding the experiences yet to think about how to take this long-term approach to the mental health and physical health impacts.
I mean, I should say, I think it's really difficult to build solidarity in situations, Jamie said, where people are targeted and must feel that this is the worst thing that could happen to anyone, and would not think I better build solidarity if you think I want to be understood on these terms. So I think that would take time, and I think that does take time, really, for those common connections to be made. It took years just for these stories to be heard at all, and that was the first step, really, just know many of the issues we've discussed, deportations, the threat of statelessness, that's, you know, this isn't specific to this case. Do think it needs a lot of studying this case and doing something in this case needs a lot of China-specific and Uyghur-specific knowledge to make sure we don't overlook new forms of transnational repression. But ultimately, some of the issues are kind of local tragedies. Statelessness seems the worst thing that can happen to you. You have no rights, you don't exist, can't register, can't do anything. That isn't a new problem. But also, looking at it practically, we can't fix that. So that's why we couch our recommendations in more modest practical terms, when obviously statelessness should be abolished and people should have the right to reside somewhere that they can see.
I'd like to, if I may, just endorse and comment that many Uyghur communities are absolutely working on cultural cohesion, enabling people to celebrate their holidays, like the Uyghur American Association, and the cultural center you're referring to is the Uyghur Cultural Center, right? Even something called the Uyghur Wellness Initiative, which is a joint project of 4 different Uyghur groups, but where will the support come from, right? Totally volunteer, and this is where there's a humanitarian side and there's a national security side. You mentioned, you know, governments will act diplomatically when they realize it is a matter of national security, national interest, their own values and national interest. And at the same time, there is a side that really is, in a way, softer because it doesn't involve confronting China. It's just will you fund programs so that it's not done completely by volunteer efforts. And I wondered if you would endorse like a duality of responding to transnational repression. One is get serious about these hard law things and also get generous for the survivors and the secondary survivors that Chloe and Elfidar are talking about, including something, you know, that's already started with the Wellness Initiative and other more informal efforts along these lines, 10 years, referring obliquely to that as well. So in a way, there are 2 separate choices, and you don't have to be America to respond. You could be small Sweden, enforce your own law, and provide community aid.
I couldn't agree more. I think we know from, you know, other cases of international politics, when something is seen as a security issue, when it's securitized, you get a lot of action, a lot of emphasis, a lot of things change, but then it becomes very difficult to change course, to insert other issues. And that's why we wanted to focus on some of the issues we did, about offering incentives, everyday surveillance, because those are overlooked if we just think about bombs and bullets. You know, bombs and bullets aren't causing that and we can't fix that. So it absolutely does need a human rights perspective as well as a security perspective. It's the moment when these things cross over, and it needs carrot and stick. Yeah, the carrot is needed, the quotas are needed, funding is needed. We're actually going to do research on this in the US. If someone gives us more funding, that's the problem with all these issues. Where does the funding actually come from? That won't come from security agencies, but we have to be creative. We have to work with other civil society groups who do have to build solidarity with those groups and try and get traction.
Thank you for all that, David. Just a couple of announcements. So UHRP has released a report on USCIS and asylum immigration waiting times and the urgent need for Uyghur asylees. So you can pick up a one-pager over on the side here. In relation to that, you also have a launch to the campaign to help process 10,000 Uyghur refugees so that they can enter Canada with the new program. Thank you all for attending and thank you.
Yaxşı oldu ya. İşte aran öldürümüz mü ne? You're driving? You're driving?
My husband, do you have, if you don't...
Yeah, I took the metro. Yeah, if you drop me on the way.
Tudo que tam do?
شبتاغ الجامعة بمسا. Yeah, ما أزمنا يجارن. رخوة ما أزمنا يجارن.